Hello, and welcome to Bible Truth Niagara, and this first in a series of 3 videos on the nature of Christ. This topic has been fiercely debated ever since Christ walked the earth over 20 centuries ago, and still today there are many diverse and strongly held opinions on the subject. On one hand is the belief that Jesus Christ was, is, and always will be of a divine nature, part of the Trinitarian Godhead. Well, at the other end of the spectrum is the belief that Jesus was a very good man whose example and teachings we do well to follow, but that he is now dead and gone forever. Who really was Jesus Christ of first century Palestine? This is our topic for this video, to explore his nature while he walked on the earth for 33 years before his death on the cross. The second video will deal with his nature after his death, resurrection, and ascension. And in the third video, I will address why this matters to us today. What impact does an understanding of Christ's nature both before and after his death have on our present lives today and on our eternal futures? We here at Bible Truth Niagara welcome your questions and comments at any time on this subject or any other related topic. You can do this by opening and logging into your own YouTube account. In our introductory video to Bible Truth Niagara, we explained that our appeal is to search for truth with those who also believe that the Bible is God's inspired word to humankind and that its pages hold the answers to all of life's deep questions. So I will now go to the Bible for some evidence on this matter of Christ's nature. If you have a Bible of your own, I encourage you to pause the video when I mention a Bible reference so that you can take the time to look it up and read along for yourself. I will be using the New International Version translation today. So let's get started, and we'll begin in the book of Luke. Let's go to Luke chapter 1, where the conception of Christ is described. In Luke chapter 1, Mary is speaking with the angel Gabriel, who has just told her that she has been chosen to be the mother of the Messiah. In verse 34 of Luke 1, Mary asks a very logical question. She inquires, "How will this be, since I am a virgin?" The angel then replies to Mary with this explanation. In verse 35, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you, so the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God." What the angel in essence has said is that this child would be fathered by God and mothered by Mary. Never before has such a conception ever credibly been described as taking place. It was unique. Now, in any union between two persons or even animals or plants, the resulting progeny always carries some characteristics from each of its parents. In this case, then, which characteristics did Jesus receive from God and which ones from Mary? The Bible answers this question, I believe, very clearly in the book of Hebrews. Let's go to Hebrews chapter 2. In this chapter, multiple reasons are given to come to the same conclusion about the nature of Christ while he was on the earth. It stresses over and over again the same point in different ways. We'll begin with verse 9 of Hebrews chapter 2. It begins, "But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels, now crowned with glory and honor." And then it goes on to explain why that is. But going back to the beginning of the verse, Jesus who was made refers to his conception and the nature that he bore because of that conception. But what does a little lower than the angels mean? How can we understand what that phrase is trying to say? If we go back a few verses to verses 6 and 7 of the same chapter, the author is quoting an Old Testament psalm of David that contains this phrase. Now, if you have a margin at the side or center or bottom of your page with cross-references, it should connect you with Hebrews 2 verses 6 to 7, and Psalm 8 verses 4 to 6. Whenever the New Testament quotes the Old Testament, it is always very, very helpful to go back to the Old Testament reference, read it, understand its context, and then we can understand why it was brought into the New Testament discussion. We won't take the time to go to Psalm 8 right now, but I do encourage you to pause the video and read that psalm for yourself in its entirety now, and see if you don't agree with me that David is here voicing his great awe that God would place mankind in such a privileged position as to be the ruler over all the animals and the birds and the fish, and a little lower than the angels. In Psalm 8, this phrase is referring to all of humankind of which David was a part. In Hebrews 2 verse 9, this same phrase is being applied to Jesus. What this tells me is that Jesus was as human as you and I. Now, in case we somehow miss the point, the author of Hebrews makes the same point again in a different way in the following 3 verses. I'll begin reading at verse 10 of Hebrews 2. In bringing many sons to glory, that's the believers including us, we hope, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation, that is Jesus, perfect through suffering. Both the one who makes men holy, Jesus, and those who are made holy, us, are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. Then verse 12 goes on to quote the Old Testament passage in Psalm 22 where that reference occurs prophetically. Now, the word that is translated here as brothers is the very common Greek word adelphos, which means from the womb. The way this word has been used throughout the New Testament, it is reasonable to conclude that here it is being used in a general sense. That is, it includes both males and females, brothers and sisters. When we use the term brothers and sisters, we are describing the members of one family, whether it's our family or any other family, such as of our pet dog or our canary or our goldfish. Puppies, birds, and fish each have brothers and sisters who are also respectively puppies, birds, and fish. And likewise, humans have brothers and sisters who are also humans. Now, if we are of the same family as Jesus, and he is not ashamed to call us his brothers or sisters, what the text is saying then is that Jesus was human. The same conclusion as verse 9. Going on to verse 13, the author of Hebrews is quoting from the Old Testament again, this time from the book of Isaiah. 2 verses, verses 17 and 18 of chapter 8 in Isaiah. Now the book of Isaiah contains many easily missed prophecies of the Messiah, and I believe that this is one of them, for the author points it out here when discussing the Messiah, Christ. In Isaiah, these verses emphasize Isaiah's dependent human nature. And here in Hebrews, the author is saying that these verses also apply to the Messiah, that he also had a dependent human nature. And finally, the last section of chapter 2 of Hebrews, verses 14 to 18, describe and explain why the Messiah had to be human in order to be the Savior of mankind. I'm only going to read the beginning of verses 14 and 17 because they stress his nature. Hebrews 2:14 begins, "Since the children, that's us, have flesh and blood, he, Jesus, too, shared in their humanity." And verse 17, "For this reason he," that's Jesus, "had to be made like his brothers or sisters in every way." It seems clear to me that while Jesus was here on the earth, that he was 100% human. I believe that that is the reason that he was born of the Virgin Mary, of a human mother, so that he, the promised Messiah, would be completely human. Now, you might ask, what about all those miracles that Jesus did that I read about in the 4 Gospels? Doesn't that show that he was something special, something more than human? Well, Moses, Elijah, and Elisha all performed miracles as fantastic as the ones that Jesus performed, yet there's no hint that they were somehow more than human. In fact, Jesus tells us himself that he, like the Old Testament prophets, was a human being through whom God worked the miraculous wonders that he did. Let's go to the book of John, where we'll read Jesus' words in chapter 5. John chapter 5 and verse 19. Jesus says, "I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does." The miracles that God chooses to perform through some of his servants does not make any of them more than human, including Jesus. Now some might say, we know that God fathered Jesus in a direct biological way, so he had to be different from us in some way. He couldn't have been exactly the same, could he? That's a very good point, and once again, the book of Hebrews gives us the answer. This time we'll go to chapter 4 of Hebrews. Now we finally get to understand how Jesus was different from the rest of us. We'll read verse 15 from Hebrews chapter 4. "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet without sin." Sinlessness. That is the only difference that the Bible makes between Jesus and every other human being that's ever lived. And it's a very big difference. It's not that Jesus couldn't have sinned, because this verse also says that he was tempted in every way such as we are. And how valid is a temptation if it's impossible to give in to it? No, God's paternity of Jesus gave Jesus the ability to lead a perfectly sinless life, something that no one else has been able to do before or since. How do we know that? We'll go to our last Bible reference, this time in the book of Romans, where the Apostle Paul is discussing righteousness through faith. And when he does that, he makes a very interesting statement in Romans 3, verse 23. He says, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." According to the Bible record, the only person who's ever lived a completely sinless life was Jesus Christ of Nazareth. It is my view that this unique difference resulted from his unique conception, which gave him a uniquely greater than normal aptitude for spiritual understanding. Though as human as you and I, Jesus voluntarily chose to exercise his gift to the utmost, which resulted in his sinless life. Jesus never was in any sense the divine God, nor was he ever a mere ordinary man. It is my view that Jesus Christ was a uniquely gifted human being with the free will to choose to make the most of his potential or not. There are many other verses that can be brought forward on this topic of Jesus' nature. I'm sure you can think of some yourself, and we here at Bible Truth Niagara would love to hear from you and your thoughts on this topic. Please do look for the second part of this series of videos regarding Jesus' nature after his death, resurrection, and ascension. And remember, 1 Thessalonians 5:21 tells us to test ourselves. As the King James Version says, prove all things. God would not ask us to do that if it were impossible to do. Thank you so much for tuning in here to Bible Truth Niagara. We hope you'll visit us again soon. Bye for now.